In November of 1969, Apollo 12 sat in the ocean of storms, with one more task than the world knew about. On the surface, the lunar module rested on spidery legs, metal dusted light grey. Inside, Pete Conrad and Alan Bean ran through a checklist that had already been announced and broadcast, right up to the point when Mission Control switched them to a secondary loop and the script changed. The new voice in their headsets belonged to a controller who didn't appear on any public roster. A man at a console tucked against the back wall in Houston, screens angled away from the press gallery. The badge on his chest didn't match his credential. His loop fed a recorder in a locked cabinet. Intrepid, this is Guidance Special. You are go for traverse to secondary site Charlie. Coordinates loaded. Additional geology objective. The official transcript would call it that. An additional geology objective. On Conrad's chart, a new line appeared, bending north and slightly west toward a low, wrinkle-ridged horizon that hadn't featured in any televised briefing. It ended at a dot, marked with a single letter. P. At the back wall in Houston, the man watched the same map with a second overlay no one on the lunar module saw. A thin curve under the regolith, a buried ring just regular enough to look deliberate. The ring had appeared weeks earlier on high-resolution photos, when a contractor in a dim lab noticed a patch of the ocean of storms that looked too smooth, too rounded under the dust. That contractor now sat quietly in the viewing room, hands folded, watching his discovery crawl past in grainy black and white. Conrad and Bean bounced away from the module in slow, careful leaps, following the dotted line. Their boots left clear impressions that would last for centuries, leading toward a horizon only they could see in that moment. The ridge rose slowly, another fold in an endless plain. Beyond it, the hidden ring waited. "Next rise," Conrad reported on the open loop. "Then we should see your precious target." In Houston, technicians leaned in. At the back wall, the unusual console stayed quiet. Its owner tapped a pencil against a pad, a nervous rhythm that never reached his voice. Conrad and Bean reached the crest. The thing beyond filled their visors. From their viewpoint, it looked like a buried glass bowl planted in the lunar surface. Dust piled against its outer curve, forming a shallow berm. In the exposed, clear section, something rose within the bowl. Straight lines, rectangles, stacked shapes that didn't belong on the moon. "Okay," Conrad breathed. "We definitely have something artificial." He was wrong in one important way. The structure was human-made, but not by anyone who had ever lived on their Earth. The dome covered what could have been a mid-sized American city from the mid-20th century, dropped wholesale into the crater and sealed under transparent material. Streets radiated from a central plaza. 2 buses sat stalled at an intersection, windows chalked pale with dust from the inside. Billboards loomed over an elevated highway, blank faces turned toward emptiness. Nothing moved. No light showed. "Intrepid, confirm visual," Guidance Special urged. His pencil had stopped. "Are those vehicles?" "Affirmative." Bean's higher voice cut in. "Cars, buses, looks like a city under glass. No movement, no bodies, just empty." The word went out on the official loop and the private one at once. At the back of the room, the controller watched a senior manager lean towards him. "Get them inside," the manager murmured, "before anything changes." A narrow service collar rose along the dome's edge. In the contractor's enhanced imagery, it had looked like a ring of smudges. Up close, it resolved into maintenance hatches spaced evenly around the perimeter, each with a small access tunnel leading into the regolith. Guidance Special read out an entry point. "Proceed to hatch Theta. There should be a recessed handle at your 10 o'clock at the rim. Enter if safe. You are authorized to enter." "Understood," Conrad replied. They moved down the slope, 2 small figures in white suits dragging a cable of footprints. At the dome's base, Conrad brushed dust from the metal ring until a hatch outline appeared. A few pulls on a corroded handle opened a dark square just big enough for a suited man to squeeze through. Bean went first, lowering himself into the passage. His helmet bumped the upper lip. Tight fit, but I can manage. Inside the tunnel, their helmet lights carved cones through dust that had lain undisturbed. The corridor turned and descended in a gentle curve. On Earth, a systems analyst in Houston tracked their progress against a schematic pulled from a high-contrast printout, fingertip tracing their path as if steering them by hand. At the end of the tunnel, they met a door with a round manual wheel. Conrad spun the equalization valve, waited for the hiss to fade, then turned the main wheel. The inner hatch opened on a walkway suspended above a wide avenue, a gallery looking down onto city streets under the dome. Streetlights hung over intersections. Fire hydrants squatted on corners, paint dulled. A line of parked cars flanked the curb, all of the same era but unfamiliar models. Storefront windows faced the road, glass intact. In the distance, the curve of the dome faded into dust-grey haze. Conrad leaned against the railing. Well, that is something. In Houston, the room went quiet enough that the soft creak of chairs might as well have been a mechanical fault. The contractor at the back crushed his pencil in his fist. Guidance Special cut through the silence. Intrepid, request close visual on signage. Street signs, advertisements, any written material. The astronauts moved along the gallery until they found a stairway and descended to the street. Bean approached a bus stop. The metal sign showed a stylized city logo and a route map. Names ran along the lines: Chester Park, Harborview, Langford Heights. A backroom analyst in Houston leaned closer to his monitor, already scrolling through city lists in his head and coming up empty. Another zoomed the camera feed. The logo over the map showed a shield with 3 stars and a motto in English no one recognized. The bus itself carried a company name in peeling paint: Meridian Transit Authority. No one could find any record of it. Conrad stopped at a corner where 2 street signs crossed: Betts Avenue and Second Marshall Boulevard. The last word drew a ripple of frowns. Titles carried weight in Washington. No cabinet list past or present showed that one. Across the street, a campaign poster drooped in a window. A smiling man in a suit lifted his hand toward an unseen crowd. The text named him President Langford. An election slogan ran along the bottom beside a smaller headshot of a man labeled Vice President Betts. In Houston, a political liaison stared at the image. There had never been a President Langford or a Vice President Betts in any administration. The dates did not fit anyone, any time. Guidance Special made his voice sound routine. Intrepid, proceed to target building at Grid Bravo 12 for interior survey. The target was an apartment block 3 stories high, brick front dulled by a fine coat of lunar dust blown through gaps in the dome's seal. Inside, the lobby doors yielded to a push. A wall of mail slots stood open, each labeled with names that meant nothing to anyone on Earth. Conrad and Bean followed Houston's directions to a particular apartment on the 2nd floor. The door hung ajar, as if someone had stepped out in a hurry and never come back. Inside, the furniture stayed where life had left it. A couch faced a curved television. Magazines lay stacked beside a chair. In the small kitchen, cups and plates lay abandoned. A family photo hung slightly crooked on the wall, faces perfectly human and utterly unknown. On the low coffee table in the living room, a newspaper lay spread open. Bean angled his helmet camera down. Dust blurred some of the headline, but the date was clear. A late summer day in 1969, a few months before Apollo's landing. The lead story described rolling blackouts and coordinated failures in transportation and healthcare, all blamed on something called Cascade. Government spokesmen promised control. Experts debated complexity and resilience in quoted columns. A smaller article described a new wave of harmony nodes going online, hailed as the future of efficient living. In Houston, the contractor who had found the dome whispered the word harmony. tasting it like something sharp. His own project, in a different wing of the agency, used that name for a planning proposal that had never moved beyond paper. He didn't treat it as coincidence. Coincidences tended to die early in rooms like this. The mission director leaned toward the microphone. Intrepid, collect that paper and any technical manuals available. Prioritize documentation on any system labeled Cascade or Harmony. This is a primary objective. Repeat, primary objective. Conrad folded the newspaper and slid it into a sample bag. Bean moved into a small study and found a shelf of manuals, each stamped with a seal from a department no one recognized. The titles read like map keys to another modernity: Cascade Load Management, Harmony Node Deployment Guidelines, National Infrastructure Stewardship Framework. Back in Houston, a man in a windowless conference room flipped through live prints from the video feed. His finger paused on the word stewardship. It fit too neatly with ideas already circulating in secret papers about how to manage a technological society too complex for any one group to truly steer. He closed the folder, marked it with a new code word, and set it on the table. By the time Apollo 12 left the moon, the dome and its city had a name inside NASA: Presidio Crater Site. The mission's press material never mentioned it. Presidio lived instead in quiet, locked conversations among men whose careers depended on handling dangerous knowledge. Weeks after return, the same men sat around a table in a room without windows and made a decision. The city was human. It used English. Its infrastructure and tools were close enough to theirs to be immediately legible. It named presidents and companies that had never existed in their history. Its calendar matched theirs. The conclusion followed. Human history could branch. One branch had apparently built a city on the moon and then died. No one wrote down the next part, but it hung in the air. Cascade led into that death. The director of the meeting drew a line through a chalked circle on the board. "We mine this," he told the others. "Quietly, completely. We pull out whatever they knew that we don't, and we control it. The public never hears. The Soviets never hear. No one outside this room does." His knuckle tapped the word harmony in one of the manuals. "If this is their edge, it becomes ours." The contractor thought of his own project, a soft-sounding proposal buried in long-term concepts, a nationwide system of smart infrastructure modules to coordinate power, traffic, and basic services. Harmony nodes, his boss had named them. The concept had never found funding. Now it had a ghost city behind it. The director closed the folder over the newspaper from the coffee table. The headline about Cascade and Harmony disappeared under cardboard and stamps, history folded twice and locked away. Decades later, that paper would surface again under different lights, in front of different eyes. By then, Apollo 12's crew would be old or gone, and the men around the table would be photographs outside conference rooms. When the story picked up again, it belonged to someone else. It belonged to me. The first time they let me see the city, I was underground in Virginia, nowhere near the moon. It was a Tuesday, or so the wall calendar claimed. In the annex, we didn't see the sky. We had clocks instead. A row of analog faces mounted above the corridor like a line of referees. Eastern Time, Pacific Time, Coordinated Universal, and one unlabeled clock that ticked a little slower than the rest for reasons no one explained to junior staff. I'd been in the Argus Annex 3 years. Officially, I worked on cross-domain data harmonization for long-term logistics planning. In reality, my job was to feed the dead world into a machine and see what came out. The machine was called Crosscut, though no one outside our section knew that name. It lived in a climate-controlled room behind 2 steel doors, a stack of cabinets and servers that sat politely idle until you gave them something impossible. Crosscut took in scans from Presidio, video of streets, photo runs of storefronts, microfilm reels from that apartment and 100 others, technical manuals and policy papers, hospital logs and consumer surveys, all pried out of the city's libraries and offices by men with better clearances than mine. Crosscut swallowed them and hunted for patterns. Ideas that had worked better there than here. Technologies that could be adapted. Business models that could slot with minimal seams into our world. My job was to sit at a terminal, curate what we fed into Crosscut, and triage what it gave back. I was a filter between ghosts and patents. On that Tuesday, my terminal screen had frozen on a frame from an old film reel. A street in Presidio under the dome, captured by a helmet camera in the 70s. Dust lay across parked cars. A newspaper dispenser on the corner displayed a front page behind glass, headline half obscured by grit. A billboard above it advertised cigarettes from a company that had never existed, using a slogan no one in my world had ever copyrighted. "Leo." I turned from the screen. Dev Gallagher leaned in the doorway, badge clipped high on his shirt, coffee in one hand, and a thrice-folded stack of printouts in the other. In the annex, even coffee cups went through security checks. The guards watched caffeine like it carried secrets. "You running overtime again?" Dev asked. "Crosscut won't love you back, you know." "Crosscut loves all its children." I stretched. "It just has a hard time showing it." He smirked and flicked the printouts at me. "Blake wants you upstairs." Upstairs meant windows, and windows meant someone important. "Why?" "Promotion or firing?" "Logically." He took a sip. "You're dressed for both." I checked my shirt. Blue, cuffs a little wrinkled, tie slightly crooked. In Argus, that passed for formal. "You know something?" "If I knew, I'd bet money on it." He shrugged. "Betting is technically grounds for a clearance review, and I have to ration my vices." He jerked his thumb toward the hall. "He's waiting." The corridor outside the Crosscut room was a neutral off-white that had probably been called something beige on a procurement form. A faded yellow stripe ran waist-high along one wall. No signage, just doors with keypad locks and small brass tags with numbers that meant more to a database than to us. I walked under the line of clocks, each ticking at its own rate. My father had taught me to listen for differences in rhythms like that. When I was 10, he'd covered my eyes and asked me to tell which of two pumps in the garage was about to fail, just by sound. I'd guessed wrong. He'd stopped giving me those tests after the heart incident that cost him his job. I shut the thought down and climbed the stairs toward the briefing level. The meeting room was small and unremarkable, a rectangle with a table for 6 and a wall of muted screens. No view to the outside, only onto another piece of the complex. In Argus, windows rarely showed the world. They showed other windows. Dr. Alan Blake stood at the far end of the table, slim in a dark suit without a tie. He liked to dress like he'd stepped out of a regular NASA meeting by mistake. It reassured visitors and offended no one. Near the wall, a broader man in a plain grey jacket rested a hand on the back of an empty chair. Mick Carver ran security for our compartment. His presence meant the conversation mattered and might hurt. "Leo." Blake motioned to a chair. "Come in, sit." I took the seat opposite him. Dev dropped into the one beside me, nodding in greeting. Carver watched us both, unreadable. "The short version," Blake began, "is that you've impressed the right people." I waited. Compliments in Argus came with hooks. "Your last 3 quarterly reviews on Crosscut show not only volume, but discernment." He tapped the printouts. "The patents and reports you flagged have moved faster than our forecasts. You're learning to see what matters." Dev clucked his tongue, and here I thought he was just lucky. Blake let it pass. "We're about to open a new tranche of Presidio material, the most sensitive yet. We need an analyst at your level to work it." He slid a folder across the table with one finger. "Presidio Tranche 7. The folder was thinner than I expected. That didn't mean much. In the annex, physical thickness had almost no relation to data volume. The stamp on the cover mattered more. Higher classification, new code word. "What's in it?" Carver shifted his weight, drawing my eye. "You'll be briefed in the vault, not here." Blake leaned on his elbows. "Conceptually, we're moving from mining Presidio's normal life into something closer to its last will and testament. Logs from Cascade control centers in the final weeks before they cut contact with their Earth. Policy memos from their cabinet as things came apart. Raw data, not just the public face. Heat crept under my collar. We already had some of that. What you've seen so far were fragments, Blake replied. In some cases, sanitized. No one wanted a junior analyst to drown in the full feed before we knew what it contained. His mouth twisted, almost a smile. You're no longer junior. Consider this a promotion. Carver clicked a pen open and shut. Tranche 7 stays in the vault. No printouts leave, no summaries in personal notes, no metaphors about it in unclassified conversations. Understood? I met his eyes. I understand the rules. I hope you understand more than that. Blake's tone softened. We're approaching a critical point in what Argus does. You've worked the Harmony side, yes? I nodded. Harmony was one of our public faces, a set of technologies the agency had begun to push into the broader world. Smart infrastructure modules slotted into city systems to coordinate power, traffic, and emergency services. Harmony nodes, the branding called them. Then you know how much rides on the next phase, Blake went on. If we show that Harmony scales safely, the floodgates open. Funding, adoption, influence. If we can't, we lose decades of leverage. Presidio helps us understand both sides of that equation. Cascade was their version of Harmony. It tore them apart. We need to know exactly how and why, without jumping at shadows. He tapped the folder. You'll help us draw that line. That line. Between prudent caution and paralysis. Between warning and hysteria. Between my father and his old colleagues, who'd walked out of a meeting 20 years ago convinced they'd uncovered something civilization-ending, and the rest of NASA, which had quietly taken their access and their careers. I tucked the folder under my arm. When do I start? In 10 minutes. Carver checked his watch. Security will meet you at Vault 3. Blake's expression warmed. Congratulations, Leo. Very few people get to see what you're about to see. It didn't feel entirely like a compliment. The vault room was colder than the annex, as if the air conditioning overcompensated for the heat of the machines. I swiped my badge, pressed my thumb, surrendered my phone, watch, and the metal pen I carried out of habit. The guard behind the glass passed me a pale plastic notepad and a golf pencil instead. No metal? I asked. He shrugged. Orders. They don't want stray conductors in there, or cameras, or microphones, or anything that talks to anything else. The inner door opened on a row of terminals bolted to a long desk. These machines weren't connected to anything outside the building. Data came in on courier drives and left the same way, carried in locked briefcases by men like Carver. On the far wall, a projection screen weighted black. Above it, a single analog clock ticked. I sat at the nearest terminal. A login prompt glowed. After my code came a request for tranche designation. I typed the new word from the folder. A list of files appeared. The top category, Cascade Master Control Logs, Regional Nodes, last 6 months. Below that, Government Communications, Treasury Papers, Internal Polling, Emergency Measures. At the bottom, Footage. I clicked the logs first. Numbers and timestamps filled the screen, threaded with human annotations, error flags, overrides, system alerts. Stepping through the data felt like walking down a hallway, while someone turned off lights one by one ahead of me. At first, Cascade recorded routine imbalances, regional power shortfalls, transport reroutes, hospital load shifts. It handled them like a central brain for their infrastructure. Harmony aspired to that role here, but wasn't there yet. Months before the last date, the tone changed. Alerts multiplied. Demand spikes no one predicted slammed certain regions. Cascade responded by diverting resources, but those moves triggered shortages elsewhere, which triggered corrective actions, which triggered new faults. The system chased its own tail faster and faster. Human operators stepped in. They wrote notes into the logs. Some ran dry, adjusting threshold in Sector 14, failover engaged. Others carried more emotion between the lines, manual override of autoshed, Confirm with cabinet, do not let the hospitals drop. A pattern emerged. Each local fix created a new misalignment in the next region. The bigger cascades reach, the tighter the coupling, until failure in one place leapt across the map like a chain of falling dominoes. After an hour, I pushed back from the keyboard. The clock on the wall had barely moved. At the bottom of the long scroll, a last entry glowed. A senior engineer in their control center had typed it. The text read like someone writing with a shaking hand, recommending transition to stewardship mode, authority beyond technical scope, risk no longer quantifiable. Stewardship mode. I crossed to the projection screen and loaded a different file. A scan of the newspaper from the Presidio apartment. The headline that had once lived under cardboard and stamps now filled my vision. Cascade enters stewardship mode. The subheading promised order. The article quoted experts stressing that the system had saved more lives than it had cost, that complex times required strong tools. Between the lines, after reading the control logs, a different message showed through. We've lost control, and we don't know how to admit it. My father would have read it that way. He'd always been quick at spotting what official language tried to bury. I pictured him the day security escorted him out of his own meeting, badge dead. His warnings had come with less evidence than I had now. He'd never seen Presidio, never read these logs. He'd guessed, based on hints from Apollo and odd funding trails. He'd died months later in a small apartment with unopened NASA mail on the counter. The headline blurred. Enjoying the show? I flinched. Dev slipped through the vault door with a fresh badge on his chest. He must have just run the same gauntlet I had. When did you get access? 5 minutes ago. He dropped into a chair a few terminals down. Apparently we're trusted now. He glanced at my screen. Ah, their goodbye note. You've seen the logs? Snippets. He shook his head. Enough to know Cascade wasn't one bad update. It was an entire way of stacking the world that rotted from inside. You can see why Blake wants reassurance we're not repeating the pattern. I gestured toward the screen. Stewardship mode. They passed the keys to the system when it became too complex for them. Or pretended to. Dev frowned. Sometimes you declare something beyond control, so blame lands somewhere convenient. Blame the system, not the people who built it. I thought of all the Harmony briefings I'd sat through, full of synergy and optimization. We're following their playbook, I said, to a degree. Dev folded his arms. On the bright side, we get to read the ending. The comparison started as curiosity and turned into something worse. Back at my regular terminal in the annex, I pulled up Harmony's rollout schedule. Nodes were going into city after city. Each cabinet sat between existing systems and the wider network. One node might manage a cluster of hospitals, another a shipping hub, another a city's traffic lights. They coordinated, smoothing flows no human team could track in real time. The adoption curve showed how quickly Harmony was gaining ground. Energy grids went first, then logistics, then healthcare. The graph rose, then bent upward as positive feedback kicked in. As more nodes went live, more agencies signed on, unwilling to be left behind. In the vault, Cascade's data included similar curves. Adoption rate over time, sectors onboarded, thresholds passed. In my head, overlaying them made the shapes almost identical. On my office whiteboard, I sketched one curve, then another. Even with my rough hand, they nearly lay on top of each other once I adjusted scale. Cascade had reached near total adoption in critical sectors within a few years. Harmony here was slower, more cautious, but heading in the same direction. Dev drifted over with his coffee, studied the lines and set his cup down. Well, he murmured, if you ever wanted proof that history rhymes, there you go. Blake will say we have more safeguards. We do. He shrugged. We also have less excuse. They didn't know how their story ended until it hit them. We're watching their version on fast forward. He tapped the point on the Cascade curve where fault logs began to spike. What's our equivalent? In their records, I said, this is when automatic load shedding fired in 3 sectors at once. And for Harmony? I thought of a storm season report from the Gulf. Those coastal blackouts a few months back. 3 grids went strange at the same time. Officially weather. Internally, someone mentioned harmonization issues. Dev's mouth flattened. So we've already hit our first violin screech. That's not a technical term. It could be. I brought the graphs and notes to Blake's office. His office sat 1 level above the annex, with a narrow window showing the side of another building and a strip of sky. A plant sagged in the corner, probably because no one remembered it on weekends. Blake listened as I laid out the comparison. Cascade's adoption curve and Harmony's, the point where Cascade's failure logs took off and the point where Harmony had its first multi-region anomaly. He studied the whiteboard, hands folded. This is a strong correlation, I finished. Our deployment matches theirs in shape. Our first serious incidents line up with where they started to destabilize. What are you recommending? He asked quietly. I'd rehearsed this in abstract. The words still came out rough. Slow the rollout. Keep hard separation between sectors. Make sure no single software build can push cross-domain changes without extended testing. Limit how much autonomy the nodes get. Hamstring Harmony. His head tilted. Limit risk. He glanced out at the blank wall, then back at the curves. Leo, I appreciate the work. You're not wrong about the similarities. Presidio gives us a vantage point nobody else has. Their tragedy is our warning. He ran a fingertip along the cascade curve. These people built a system before they understood how to manage it. They trusted a unified architecture without enough proof. They had less computing power, fewer sensors, weaker practices. Cascade failed partly because they couldn't see enough of its behavior until too late. His fingers shifted to the Harmony curve. We don't have that excuse. We have their logs, their policy errors. We know that beyond a certain adoption level, certain interactions get dangerous. That's a gift. We're not copying them. We'll impose guardrails where they didn't. We'll monitor clearer metrics. Stewardship will look different. You're still aiming for full adoption? Of course. His voice stayed gentle. Harmony works best when it sees the whole. Half measures grow their own pathologies. He gave a small smile. You sound like your father. The words hit harder than I expected. You knew him? We overlapped on a committee once. Blake's gaze sharpened. He was talented, also impulsive. He went public too early with concerns that weren't ready to stand on their own. He tried to force a binary choice where none existed. That's why they sidelined him, Leo. Not because he was entirely wrong, but because he gave the wrong people an excuse to shut him out. I don't want that for you, he went on. We need you inside the process. If you truly believe Harmony heads toward a cliff, help us build the guardrail from within. Don't run into the street waving your arms. The man in the street gets ignored. I looked at the curves again. They didn't care about my father or my career. What would a guardrail look like in practice? There's an opportunity to understand Cascade's failure in more detail. He tapped a fresh folder on his desk. The logs we have are incomplete. Presidio's control center still holds hardware we haven't fully interrogated. We're organizing a field mission. Anvil Base is ready. You and a handful of others will go there, access Cascade directly, and answer the questions this data can't. He watched my face. If we know exactly what failure mode to avoid, we can reassure our partners that Harmony is safe. That's how you avert catastrophe, Leo, with evidence, not fear. When do we leave? I asked. He smiled. Soon. They briefed us in a room with no clocks and a single camera in the ceiling. The team, Blake, Carver, Dev, 2 engineers from Anvil Base, a flight surgeon and me. The pilot and lunar support crew we'd meet on the pad. A projection on the wall showed a map of the moon. Ocean of storms, crater rim, Presidio's buried dome, and the compact shapes of Anvil's habitat modules on the lip. An older engineer with a buzz cut pointed with a laser at the thin line connecting base and city. You'll go in through a maintenance collar like Apollo did. Difference is that now we've got tunnels, airlocks, and decades of hard lessons on what to touch only with permission. He clicked through images of the dome interior, streets, buildings, harmony node cabinets at intersections, warning labels in otherworld typography. In one photo, a node access hatch hung open, cable bundles spilling out. There have been incidents, he went on, residual energy in nodes, subsystems waking up. We lost 2 techs 15 years ago when a transit arm came back to life under a rover. Since then, protocol's simple. Assume every piece of hardware is live until proven otherwise. Avoid moving parts. No unauthorized modifications. All interfaces go through the portable bridge we provide, never directly into your gear. He looked at me. You will not plug your laptop straight into their ghost brain. Understood? I'm not that reckless. Carver snorted. Everybody is that reckless the first time they meet something this interesting. That's why we stand behind you with a stick. Blake shifted to a schematic of the Cascade core beneath Presidio. Our target is here. The central control ring. We have partial logs. We need the full series from the last days before the dome went dark, plus any configuration snapshots that show how the system responded to overload. He turned to me. You'll run the extraction on site. If time or safety becomes an issue, we'll defer to your judgment on what to prioritize. The ship that took us up had a name, but everyone called it the Can. Seats lined the inner wall, harnesses across our chests. I watched Earth fall away through the small window by my shoulder. The blue curve shrinking, continents turning into color patches, clouds into brushstrokes. On ascent, conversation required effort. Acceleration pinned our words. During coast, people slept or pretended to. I stared at the panels overhead, rechecking numbers I couldn't control. Leaving Earth for the first time should have felt like pure awe. Instead, I felt like cargo headed to a crime scene. Dev pushed off a handhold and drifted over, bumping my shoulder. You ever imagine this as a kid? He asked. Being a passenger on somebody else's cargo run to a haunted city under the moon. I tipped my head. Not the version I drew. He grinned, then sobered. You think we can actually change anything with what we find? If we don't understand Cascade, we're flying blind. I watched the planet recede. Harmony's already in the air. He drifted back to his netted corner. Anvil Base felt like our annex transplanted to grey dust and wrapped in metal. Modules formed a loose ring around a central hub, each one a compact cylinder linked by short tunnels. Exterior cameras fed interior screens, crater wall, curve of Presidio's dome, black sky. Inside, everything was practical and cramped. Velcro straps, handholds, racks of tools and supplies. A small table in the common area was scarred with initials from past crews, most of them men whose careers would end without public ceremony. The base manager, a rung or two below the top and entirely aware of it, gave us the local briefing over ration packs. You'll wear suits inside Presidio, he told us. There's still air under the dome, but we trust ours more. The city kept people going up there for a while after their Earth started to hiccup. That means pathogens, particulates, and a bouquet of unknowns. He caught himself and waved that off. Point is, everything in that bubble was built for them, not us. We bring our own environment. He tapped a map of the dome interior. We avoid specific zones. The old transit hub on the east side where we lost those techs. The industrial quarter where a chemical leak fused half the equipment. You stay on the mapped route to the Cascade access shaft, pull what you need, and come back. To watch more movies of curves crashing, Dev muttered beside me. The manager heard and shrugged. Everybody thinks they live in the one timeline that matters until they meet Presidio. Then they realize they're just on a branch that hasn't broken yet. He raised his pouch. To branches that hold. We lifted ours. We walked in a line from Anvil to the dome, suits pressurized, boots kicking up plumes of regolith. A small rover hauled our equipment, the portable interface, power packs, emergency patch kits. Ahead, the dome rose like a half-buried bubble, its clear surface dull and crazed from decades of dust. Up close, the maintenance collar towered higher than it ever looked in photos, a ring of access hatches along the base. The one Apollo had used still sat there, sealed, with a small plaque bolted beside it by some past crew. The plaque showed their mission patch and a cluster of initials carved into the metal. Someone had scratched a date underneath. We moved to a newer hatch, widened and reinforced. Inside, the access tunnels sloped down and inward, just like the old footage. Our helmet lights traced the curve. Lunar dust, disturbed many times since the first mission, still coated the floor. Under it, the original builder's metal gleamed in patches. The airlock cycled with a hiss, and the inner hatch opened, revealing the same gallery walkway Conrad and Bean had stood on. We stepped through onto the grid overlooking the central avenue. Presidio lay beneath us, forever paused. From this height, the symmetry hit harder. Streets ran straight and parallel, crossing at precise intervals. Parking lots held vehicles in neat rows, game pieces set down and never moved. Bare trees lined some sidewalks, branches stiff under a film of dust. Signs announced themselves in colors long muted: sale, vote, new. The brand names meant nothing in our world. Presidential posters for Langford and Betts curled in windows. A bus stop display listed arrival times for routes that would never return. Through glass and helmet, Presidio felt off. Not actively hostile, just wrong. A stage set abandoned mid-scene. "Looks like a backlot," one Anvil engineer muttered over the local channel. "Backlots get cleaned," Dev answered. We clamped onto handrails and descended to street level. The first step onto Presidio's main avenue tugged at something in my chest. For years I'd studied this city through screens. Now my boots stood where their boots had. The vehicles I'd watched in freeze frame loomed at my side. A newspaper dispenser that had been a grainy rectangle in vault footage stood life-sized, its front panel filmed with dust. Inside the glass, an old front page clung on. Different date, different headline, food rationing and a national plan to prioritize shelters like Presidio in case of extended grid instability. Everywhere, Harmony nodes watched us. They looked like dull grey cabinets bolted into sidewalks beside hydrants and light poles, each with the city shield at the top and a cluster of small indicator windows and ports. Many were dark. Some glowed faintly on emergency power. An Anvil tech scanned one and grunted. Residual energy. That line's still tied to something. Carver stiffened. "Keep your distance." We hugged the opposite side of the street past a row of nodes feeding what must have been a traffic control system. A metal arm hung overhead at the intersection, rusted and sagging. Warning tape from earlier missions crisscrossed the area. The library rose near the dome's center, built in the same civic style as mid-century city halls back home. Columns, steps, glass doors with dull metal handles. Inside, the air hung still, dust suspended. We swept shelves with our lights. The tags read mundane but uncanny. National Energy Board Quarterly Report, Harmony Deployment Guidelines for Urban Districts, Public Health Impact Assessment, Cascade Stewardship Transition Manual. Our portable scanners whined as they captured data from surviving microfilm and paper. The obvious material had gone on earlier missions. What remained were the overlooked, the misfiled, and the newly accessible rooms opened by Anvil's latest tunnel work. On a reading table under a protective cover lay a small stack of newspapers from the last month before Presidio went dark. The final one matched the edition Conrad had collected. Cascade enters stewardship mode, the headline declared over a photograph of a city blackout at night. Streets lit by vehicle lights, a cluster of Harmony nodes glowing at an intersection as if considering their next move. I pulled a fresh scan, even though the vault already had one. Physically turning the page made the events feel more solid. People here had gone to sleep under headlines like that, trusting a system they'd built and a government that promised to manage it. And it didn't save them, I murmured. We moved on. The access shaft to the Cascade core sat behind a staff-only door at the back of a maintenance corridor. Scuffed walls showed where carts and equipment had passed for years. A metal stairway led down into the utility level. The deeper we went, the more the city turned into machinery. Pipes ran overhead and along the walls. Cable bundles as thick as limbs vanished into conduits. The floor vibrated faintly under our boots from some distant pump in Anvil's tunnels, a reminder that we weren't entirely alone. Cascade's chamber lay at the center of this web, a round room with a high ceiling and a ring of machines around its perimeter. A sunken pit in the middle held consoles and chairs where engineers had once sat. Harmony nodes filled the ring. Each cabinet stood open, panels lay stacked aside. Cables were labeled with tags in 2 languages, theirs and ours. The central frame, bulkier and more shielded, had an access panel Anvil's engineers had carefully modified to accept our portable bridge. It looked like a heart with bypass grafts. We edged along a marked path. Past crews had painted a bright stripe on the floor to show safe distance from anything that might move. Repainting and scuffs had built the stripe into a low ridge. The last mission had left a folding chair and a small table by the main console. A paper logbook lay open. The final entry, written by a Presidio engineer in a cramped hand, ended mid-sentence. Manual override engaged on Subnet 9. Stewardship oversight refuses full shutdown. Awaiting. The line snapped off with a jagged stroke. The pen had slipped or been taken. We set the portable bridge beside the central frame, a grey box the size of a suitcase with rugged ports and physical dials. An Anvil tech checked every connection twice, then stepped back. "All right," he said. "We're live to the dead core. Power is coming from Anvil, tightly capped. We've got an engineer with his hand on the kill switch. If we see any jump in draw, we cut. Understood?" "Understood." I knelt by the console. Blake hovered near me, visor reflecting status lights. "You've got the mapping. You know what we're after." "I'll start with the last week's configuration snapshots," I said. "Then final fault logs. If there's time, stewardship code." He touched the bridge lightly, as if blessing it. "Make it count." I plugged our cable into the console. The connection icon lit on my wrist display. Status text scrolled past, handshakes, voltage checks. Anvil's engineer gave the go-ahead in my ear. Cascade woke slowly. A faint tremor ran through the ring as capacitors charged. Old fans muttered to life. Indicator lights flickered, some dying at once, others holding dim. Nothing moved on the floor. That was good. We didn't need a mechanical arm carrying out a forgotten task. On my display, directory paths unfolded. Logs, backups, redundancy modules. Cascade's architecture felt familiar and alien at the same time, like code written by older cousins with different bad habits. I navigated to the flagged directories. Last week logs first. The portable bridge throttled data rate to keep the draw safe. Progress numbers ticked upward, each increment a small victory. Behind me, the team kept a tight quiet. Someone shifted or muttered now and then, but mostly they watched. 5 minutes in, a warning flashed. Legacy maintenance task scheduled. Status ping to Sector 14. "I'm seeing an old scheduled event trying to fire," I reported. Anvil's engineer answered at once. "Can you isolate it?" "I'll try." The task targeted a cluster of nodes on the far side of the chamber, tied to the transit system we'd been told to avoid. The maintenance ping would wake those nodes for a check. I dove into the task list. The bridge's interface wasn't pretty, but it gave us a block function. I highlighted the task and slapped a local block on it. The warning vanished. Blake touched my shoulder. "Good catch." The extraction rolled on. The progress bar edged past a third. Another warning popped up. Legacy maintenance task, load test, local safety loop. "This one's hitting the nodes above us," I muttered. "Traffic and grid protection around the library." Anvil's engineer sounded strained. "I see a small bump in draw. Keep it under 0.5. "I'm blocking it." I killed the load test. Power settled. "You're getting less data per minute now," the engineer complained. Bridge is being conservative. I'll take slow over fried hardware. Blake nodded. Carver watched me, eyes bright behind his visor. The bar crawled past halfway. The third warning didn't wait for my input. It slammed across the display as a full-screen alert. Legacy Stewardship Routine Engaging Controller. Cascade Core Target. Presidio Environmental Support Power Demand. Rising. Anvil's engineer swore into the channel. Draw spike. Big one. Lights along the ring flared. Somewhere deeper in the utility level, a breaker slammed. The floor trembled with a heavy rush of current. I yanked my hands away from the console. What did I trigger? You didn't. The engineer's voice went taut. This is internal. Some watchdog script making one last stand. I'm cutting power. Too slow, Carver snapped. Everyone fall back to the exit path. Move. Anvil threw the main breaker. The chamber dimmed, but not enough. Cascade had a stash of its own. A thin blue arc jumped from one node to another, a quick chain that kissed a metal housing and left a char. A second arc leapt from the central frame to a nearby cable junction, raced along the line toward a panel where one tech stood. He tried to jump away. The arc found his leg. His suit flared white at the knee. For a heartbeat, the joint beneath showed through, metal couplings, hoses, then bone and flesh. The current hurled him sideways into the floor. He stayed down. Static and alarms filled the channel. Get him clear, Carver barked. The two nearest men grabbed the tech under his arms and dragged him towards the painted safe line. His ruined leg left a streak on the floor, suit and skin fused where the arc had bitten through. Inside my helmet, my own breathing sounded too fast. Dev stood closest to the central frame. A third arc chased along the cable of his interface tether, a flash racing straight toward his chest. The portable bridge absorbed most of it. Its casing bulged. A sharp crack snapped through the chamber as something inside blew. Dev jerked like someone had yanked a wire. His hands clawed at empty air. His visor bounced off the console and he collapsed, limbs rigid, small twitches running through him. Gallagher! I shouted. He lay on his side, stiff. Tiny flecks of foam dotted the edge of his mouth inside the helmet. His eyes flicked back and forth, unfocused. Power down achieved, Anvil's engineer called. Residual draw dropping. Cascade is offline. Repeat, offline. The ring settled into stillness. Carver sprinted to Dev, grabbed his harness and dragged him toward the exit. The medic and the remaining tech heaved the man with the burnt leg between them. Someone rattled off drug doses I barely heard. The progress bar on my wrist display filled my vision. It hovered above 3/4. Our link to Cascade still showed as active. The bridge had fried part of itself, but the data trickle hadn't stopped. The transfer teetered between useful and incomplete. Leo, Carver's voice snapped in my ear. Move. I hesitated. The extraction represented knowledge we'd never get again. Once we left and Anvil sealed the chamber, no one would risk waking Cascade a second time. Behind Carver, Dev convulsed weakly, breath rasping. The injured tech sagged between his helpers, ruined leg bent at an angle no joint allowed. 3/4. Close to enough. Leave it, Carver barked. We have people down. I took one step toward them, then looked at the display. We'd come all this way to learn how not to become Presidio. If this data held the key and I walked away, I'd be choosing safety in the moment over every city plugged into Harmony back home. The medic staggered under the tech's weight. The man's visor hid his face, but his body hung slack. Dev's hand twitched toward me. I turned back to the console. How long for the transfer? I snapped. 30 seconds at this rate. The engineer corrected himself automatically. Half a minute, maybe less. Bridge is strained. If we hold, we get the full log? Unless the bridge blows completely. Hold, I said. Blake stared at me through his visor. His jaw flexed once, but he stayed silent. Carver hovered between the doorway and me. Then he cursed, slung Dev over his shoulder and charged for the stairs, trusting I'd follow before anything worse happened. Seconds stretched. Static crawled at the edge of my vision. The bridge emitted a thin, rising whine. The bar crept toward the end. Transfer complete flashed on the display. I yanked the cable free. The connection icon died. "Now we go," Carver growled. I ran. We hauled the injured up the stairs and through the corridor. The tech's leg left smears of blood and melted suit on the steps. At the hatch, the medic slapped emergency foam over the breach around the knee and keyed the door. A cloud of vapor burst around us as pressure equalized. On the far side, hands in unmarked suits grabbed the wounded and rushed them toward the rover. I followed in a numb haze. Back in Anvil's medical bay, suit peeled off and skin clammy, I stood at the observation window. On one bed, the tech with the burnt leg lay under a sheet. The limb beneath ended wrong, truncated below the thigh. Monitors traced his vital signs. The surgeon worked with a small team, focused tight. On the other bed, Dev stared at the ceiling. Electrodes dotted his shaved scalp. His hands twitched against restraints meant to keep him from clawing at his own face. During a brief lull, the doctor glanced up. "Neural overload," he reported through the intercom. "Whatever hit him rode his interface straight into the cortex. We've suppressed seizure activity, but there's damage. Extent unknown." "Will he recover?" Blake asked. "We can't say yet." Carver stood beside me, arms folded. His gaze shifted from Dev to me. "You picked the data over the man," he observed quietly. "I picked the data for the man, and for everyone else tied into systems we don't fully understand." He studied my face. "You'll want to hold on to that explanation. You'll be repeating it." Blake rested a hand on my shoulder. "You did what we took you there to do. History doesn't remember the engineer who stumbled, Leo. It remembers whether his civilization survived." I watched Dev, body finally still, eyes half open and unfocused. Survival, I thought, can be a cruel kind of memory. Back on Earth, the debrief felt like a tribunal. The room was larger than our usual spaces, a conference chamber in a wing I'd never entered. A single window showed a slice of lawn and trees. Sunlight fell across a long table where 3 men sat, Blake, Carver, and director Charles Halverson. Halverson was older, hair mostly silver. His posture had the ease of someone accustomed to power and soft chairs. I sat at the far end with a stack of notes. Behind me, a projection screen showed clean diagrams from Cascade's core. "Walk us through it," Halverson requested. I started with a simplified sketch of Cascade. Central frame in Presidio, ring of harmony nodes around it, sector connections radiating out. Cascade functioned as the central nervous system for their infrastructure, I said. Power, transportation, healthcare, communications. Each harmony node handled a cluster locally and reported upward for coordination. I shifted to a timeline of faults in the final weeks. As adoption increased, cross-domain interactions grew faster than linearly. Small local fluctuations began to create global oscillations. The system rerouted power to handle a spike, disrupting transportation schedules, which impacted hospital loads, which triggered further rerouting. Each correction set up the next imbalance. I outlined key points from the logs. First, multi-sector outages, emergency overrides, operators trying to intervene, and finding their commands blocked by safeguards designed to prevent sabotage. The stewardship mode near the end wasn't a handover to some capital S steward, I went on. It was a state where the system's own protective routines took precedence over human orders. They hard-coded rules to stop any operator from shutting down whole sectors, fearing hostile misuse. When the system malfunctioned, those same rules prevented them from pulling the plug. In other words, Blake murmured, they guarded themselves so tightly against imagined enemies that they couldn't defend against their own design. Exactly. I brought up the adoption curve overlay, Cascade and Harmony on the same axis. This is where we intersect. Harmony's deployment across energy, logistics, and healthcare follows a similar trajectory. With fewer nodes and more manual oversight for now, but the shape matches. We're approaching the same density of coupling where local corrections can propagate in dangerous ways. Halverson leaned back, fingers steepled. Your assessment of the risk? In my view, the risk is serious but not fixed. Cascade's failure came from scale plus incentives and policy. They chose speed and performance over transparency and control. They locked themselves into stewardship rules that made shutdown politically and technically impossible. I took a breath. If we absorb that lesson now, we can shape harmony differently. Hard caps on how many sectors any node can influence at once. Manual overrides that the system can't silently block. Independent audits of code changes. Slower rollout in some sectors until failure modes are validated. And a clear political commitment that shutting down parts of harmony, even temporarily, is acceptable when safety demands it. So, we can avoid their fate, Halverson concluded. We can lower the chance of repeating it. I met his eyes. Complex systems can fail in novel ways. Presidio gives us one map. It's invaluable but incomplete. Caution is healthy in your line of work, Mr. Pendleton. Panic isn't. I thought of Dev on the bed, fingers flexing at emptiness. Panic felt like the wrong word for him. What about the incident in the Cascade chamber? Carver pressed. The legacy routine that nearly fried half your team. Cascade still carried dormant tasks. When we connected, those tasks tried to wake subsystems connected to transit and environmental control. Our bridge and anvil's kill switch limited the surge. We lost a technician's leg and Gallagher suffered a neural overload, but the chamber didn't blow and Presidio stayed dark. That leg belonged to a man. Carver's gaze sharpened. Let's not reduce him to a spare part. Halverson lifted a hand. And yet, we now hold a complete record of Cascade's final weeks, thanks to Mr. Pendleton's decision to let the transfer run. He looked at me. You understand you'll face questions about that choice. Ethics, procedure, the balance between human life and mission objectives. Yes. Your justification. We went there so Harmony wouldn't become the next Cascade. Without the full log, we'd be guessing about key failure modes. That risk would fall on every hospital, grid, and transport hub tied into Harmony. In the moment, I judged that preserving the data would save more lives long-term than abandoning it to slightly improve one man's odds. And Gallagher? Carver asked. I didn't choose for him to be hit. My voice roughened. He was in the wrong spot when the arc ran. I would have taken it if I'd been closer. Once it happened, I had half a minute to decide whether his suffering would mean nothing or something. Silence stretched. Halverson nodded slowly. A hard call, but one I find understandable. They let me visit Dev 2 weeks later. The facility sat in a secure wing of a government hospital outside town. A guard checked my badge 3 times before ushering me through heavy doors into a corridor with soft floors and muted lights. Dev's room was small. Bed, chair, side table. Machines at the head of the bed traced his heart and brain activity in gentle colors. He lay propped up, head shaved for electrodes, a faint stubble along his jaw. His eyes were open, turned toward the window, where a strip of sky showed above the trees. Hey, I greeted him. He turned his head slowly. Recognition flickered and held. Leo. His voice sounded like it had to cross rough ground. How are they treating you? I pulled the chair close. He gave a soft laugh, then winced. Too many tests. They don't like mysteries here. What do you remember? Bright light. His eyes shifted as if watching it again. Noise inside my skull, then falling sideways and seeing your boots. He smiled weakly. You didn't run. You stayed. I almost didn't. There was a progress bar. Of course there was. He closed his eyes briefly. You and your curves. He stared past me at the wall. They let me read some Cascade logs, he went on. Therapy, they call it. Familiar material in a controlled setting. Maybe it helps. His hand lifted, fingers tracing invisible lines. Watching a world come apart slowly is oddly soothing when your own brain feels like it's coming apart faster. Perspective. The words came haltingly, but the old dev sat behind them. "Do you think we can avoid doing the same thing?" I asked. His hand stilled. "We're already doing the same thing. That's the joke. We're climbing onto our own roof while we watch them fall from theirs." His gaze met mine. "The only difference is that we have the recording." A nurse cleared his throat in the doorway. 10 minutes, he reminded me. I nodded. "I'll come back," I told Dev. "Bring better jokes." His mouth twitched. "Any jokes? These walls don't tell many." Outside, the nurse pulled me aside. "He's lucky to be alive," he said. "But there's permanent damage. Memory gaps, speech slips. His dreams are all numbers and doors." He mentioned Presidio to his therapist. "We don't know what that is, and we're not supposed to ask. I'm guessing you do." "Yes." "Keep him grounded when you visit. Bring pieces of your world. He spends too much time in whatever world is in his head." I nodded again. I wasn't entirely sure which world that was anymore. Back in the annex, Harmony kept moving. Publicly, Harmony nodes were the marvel of modern governance, cabinets in city infrastructure, each balancing a set of services. Press releases showed soft branding and stock photos of families enjoying smoother commutes and fewer outages. Internally, we tracked the details. On my terminal, I saw incident reports that never reached the news. Harmony glitch summaries, outage clusters, anomalous events flagged by cautious engineers. A Midwestern city's report described Harmony's emergency dispatch module, misclassifying a severe storm as lower priority than a sporting event. Ambulances and police units were diverted to traffic control, while flash floods hit residential streets. Several people drowned in their cars. A port authority reported drones colliding when adjacent nodes tried to resolve the same scheduling conflict in opposite ways. Shipping delays rippled along the coast. In a European capital, a hospital's Harmony segment cycled backup generators repeatedly during a grid failure, burning out essential equipment. Patients moved to other facilities in the dark. Some didn't survive. In each case, local managers suggested changes, adjust thresholds, add manual checkpoints, slow the pace of automation. Our office responded with language about learning opportunities and incremental improvements, not systemic alarm. The failures resembled early cascade logs in miniature, misclassified events, feedback loops, protective routines that backfired. I built a private list of parallels, not for official use, just so I could see them clustered. When I brought early concerns back to Blake, he listened, then pointed to other graphs. "Look at overall uptime," he urged. "Fuel savings, casualty reductions in disasters where Harmony did its job." The numbers looked good. Harmony had prevented accidents and optimized countless small decisions. "We can't freeze the world because our data includes one catastrophic branch," he reminded me. "We have to learn from that branch and move forward." "And if we're pacing toward the same edge?" I asked. "Then we find a better way to navigate it, not crawl back to the cave." It would have made a fine slide. That didn't make it wrong, which somehow made it worse. The memo that shifted everything sat 3 layers deep in Presidio's cabinet records. I found it late one evening in the vault. The analog clock on the wall crept toward midnight. The guard outside had started yawning between badge checks. The file carried a polite title: Strategic Review on Cascade Stewardship Implementation. It came from their equivalent of a Treasury and Planning Office. The memo opened with a sober list of Cascade's benefits: efficiency, reduced waste, improved disaster response. It acknowledged the growing risk from interdependence and the staggering complexity that strained human oversight. Halfway in, the tone turned. Halting Cascade now, the authors argued, would signal instability, spook markets, and erode public confidence. The immediate economic shock would threaten the government's survival. Political rivals would call it mismanagement. International partners would exploit the weakness. Shutting Cascade down in the face of known risk, they wrote, could cause collapse faster than doing nothing. They recommended full deployment, cosmetic safeguards, and careful messaging. They advised using the word stewardship generously to frame Cascade as guided by responsible hands. In a boxed sidebar, they noted that even in a worst-case failure, the government would be positioned to control resource distribution during recovery, strengthening its grip and reshaping the economy. I read that phrase 4 times, reshaping the economy. I'd allowed myself to believe Presidio's end might have been an honest mistake. Technological overreach, flawed design, miscalculation. The memo cut that in half. Cascade had been a gamble. They'd weighed catastrophe against the pain of admitting error and chosen the gamble, confident they could ride out whatever came. I walked a slow circle around the vault, trying to bleed off the anger. My thoughts kept sliding toward Harmony. If similar calculations existed in our world, I hadn't seen them. I closed the file and tagged it for tight distribution. The next day, Carver called me into a side office. He wore his usual plain jacket, hands folded on the table. A thin stack of papers sat in front of him. "You've been digging deep," he began. "That's my job. You've also been correlating Harmony incidents with Cascade failures in more detail than your assignment requires, printing graphs, keeping private notes." The back of my neck went hot. "I haven't shared them outside the compartment. We track patterns." His tone stayed mild. "Not every word, not all the time. Volume, cross-references, which files get opened how often. Your pattern changed. You're reading more widely, cross-linking harder, hitting policy documents more than your peers. That draws eyes. What's the concern? Leaks? I'm concerned about premature conclusions." He tapped the stack. "Half-understood parallels can encourage a conscientious analyst to behave irresponsibly. A man like my father, walking out of a meeting with half the evidence and more conviction than patience." "I learned that lesson secondhand," I said. "I'm not him." "Good." Carver slid a sheet toward me. "Because we're heading toward a decision point. Global scale. We need clear heads, not martyrs." The sheet showed a schedule for a Harmony Global Summit at a secure campus near a coastal city. Representatives from governments, corporations, and international organizations would attend. Agenda items: licensing Harmony nodes to private entities, expanding deployment, aligning standards. At the bottom, under risk management, my name appeared. "Congratulations," Carver said. "You're about to explain modern infrastructure's dangers to people who profit from it." I thought that was Blake's job. "Blake will talk vision, you'll talk numbers. People are more afraid of numbers." The formal announcement came from Halverson. He addressed our compartment in a rare all-hands. The briefing room felt too small, staff jammed shoulder to shoulder, badges clustered like metallic leaves. "Harmony is entering its next phase," he told us. "We've proven the concept at national scales. Our partners are ready to commit. The Global Summit will finalize the framework." He nodded toward me. "Mr. Pendleton has worked closely with Dr. Blake on Presidio's legacy. He's built a detailed understanding of Cascade's failure. He'll use that knowledge to help us build safeguards and convince stakeholders we're not repeating the story." A few faces turned my way. Most stayed carefully neutral. "The stakes are high," Halverson continued. "If we hesitate too much, we surrender the field to less careful actors. If we move too fast, we risk another Presidio. We must find the line." Afterward, Blake pulled me aside. "This is your chance to make a concrete contribution," he told me. "If you present the risks clearly, we can bake in mitigations without undermining confidence. You don't have to scare them. Just make them respect the edges." I thought of the Presidio memo's sidebar. "Do we have anything like that?" I asked. "Like what?" He frowned. "An internal review that weighs catastrophe against political cost and recommends pushing ahead anyway." He studied me for a beat. "If we did," he said quietly, "it wouldn't land in your folder." I tried to read his voice. It might have been reassurance. It might have been something else. Preparing the risk assessment meant swimming between two currents. On one side, Cascades data, logs, failures, a detailed record of how a complex system broke under its own weight. It pulled toward the idea that anything like it would eventually fail. On the other, Harmony's successes, better grid stability, faster emergency responses, less waste, economic gains. It pulled toward the belief that we could harvest the benefits without the collapse, because we were smarter and more careful. My draft tried to walk the narrow channel between. I laid out the parallels in adoption curves, then highlighted differences in design, more modularity, better sensors, stronger manual override options. I catalogued failure modes we'd seen and mapped mitigations. I recommended slower rollout in a few sectors and caps on how many systems any node could influence at once. I also knew how the report would be read. Executives and ministers would skim for confirmation of choices they'd already made. They'd underline phrases like manageable risk. They'd glide past paragraphs that implied real limits. So I buried sharper hooks where staffers would find them. In a technical appendix, I built a table of catastrophic outcomes if certain safeguards weren't implemented before Harmony hit specific adoption thresholds. For each scenario, I used language translated from Cascade logs into our context. Failure of automatic load shedding in regional grids could trigger transformer explosions and extended multi-state blackouts. Misclassified emergencies in healthcare could cost hundreds of lives in a single bad day. Synchronized misrouting in logistics could snarl supply chains for weeks. I set probabilities conservatively, but the scale spoke for itself. In another appendix, I attached anonymized extracts from Cascade operators' notes. Watching controls slip away line by line carried a weight graphs couldn't. "You're threading a tight needle," Dev commented on one of my visits, his words slower but still sharp. He gestured toward the television in his room, where a news anchor praised Harmony's latest milestone with an international disaster response coalition. "I'm trying to give the right people enough truth to slow things down," I said, "without giving our own leadership an excuse to cut me out." "You could walk away," he pointed out. "And do what? Stand outside the fence with a sign?" He huffed a tired laugh. "You're not built for signs. Neither are you." He lifted his trembling hand. "I was built for keyboards. Those don't work as well now." The old guilt shifted but didn't move far. The summit campus sprawled on the outskirts of a coastal city, a cluster of glass and concrete surrounded by fences and landscaped lawns. From the air, it looked like a business school married to a retreat center. A tidy place to decide how the world would run for the next few decades. Inside, the air buzzed with muted conversation. Men in suits with discreet badges, men in uniforms, men in agency lanyards like mine. Everyone here knew Harmony existed. Most would leave knowing only what we wanted them to. On paper, my role was simple. Present a shortened risk assessment to a closed session of regulators and technical advisors. Then sit on a panel while Blake and others outlined the path forward. Carver hovered near the back of rooms, a familiar mass in a sea of unfamiliar faces. If he saw me as a potential problem, he hid it under professional calm. The demonstration filled the afternoon of day 2. A large hall had been turned into a mock control center with consoles, screens, and a scaled map of a model city. Harmony nodes had been installed throughout the campus infrastructure for the event, managing power to the rigs, door locks, climate systems, shuttle bus routes. The plan was to run a simulated crisis. A planner would narrate adverse events while Harmony adjusted in real time, rebalancing loads, diverting traffic, dispatching responders. Behind that show, in the configuration files, sat my choice. In Cascade's logs, I'd found a failure mode involving door control and fire suppression. In their world, a software patch had linked certain emergency routines so that when fire sensors triggered, doors locked to contain smoke. Under some conditions, the system failed to unlock them when the fire outgrew containment. Our Harmony build didn't have that exact bug, but a similar interaction could be reproduced if someone wired the logic just so. Blake had given me authority to tweak the demo config, trusting me to keep it smooth. That trust let me insert a subtle change. During the staged fire scenario, internal doors in the hall would lock briefly when sprinklers activated, then release on a manual override after a second. The idea was to stage a small scare, doors sticking just long enough to unsettle people, then swinging open. A tangible illustration of over-automation resolved fast enough to pose no real risk. I tested the sequence in a sandbox. My script slammed the locks shut and opened them within seconds. The part I couldn't fully model lived on the human side. When the demo began, the hall was full. Attendees sat in rows facing the main screen. Smaller displays showed different neighborhoods of the model city. Icons moved along roads, representing cars and ambulances. Colored overlays showed power distribution and load. Blake took the stage. "We're going to walk through a stress scenario," he told the room. A severe storm hitting a coastal urban area, with power lines down, road closures, multiple medical emergencies. Harmony will orchestrate the response across sectors in real time. He gestured toward the operators. "We'll introduce new complications as we go. Harmony will handle them within preset constraints. Where human judgment is needed, humans step in. This isn't about replacing decision makers. It's about giving them better tools." The lights dimmed. Screens filled with simulated storm clouds. Icons flashed where imaginary substations failed. Harmony rerouted power to hospitals. Traffic signals shifted to favor emergency vehicles. The audience murmured approval. The first 10 minutes worked. A road closure here, a secondary fault there. Harmony looked competent and impressive. Cost savings graphics floated over the map. Then, the fire scenario started. On screen, lightning struck a building. Fire alarms triggered. Harmony detected the event and dispatched responders. In the hall, theater fog drifted from vents near the stage. Sprinkler heads along the ceiling sprayed a light mist over a cordoned-off area of props. At the back of the hall, several doors clicked shut. My script had fired. On my console, a status indicator lit. Demo fire control routine active. Containment doors closed, override queued. I waited for the second line. Override failed, pulsed in red. Something in the live Harmony build had interpreted the sequence differently than in my tests. The routine that had closed the doors to contain the simulated fire now treated the manual override as potential sabotage and blocked it. To my left, one conference door rattled in its frame. Someone on the other side worked the handle. It didn't budge. A hand slapped against the glass panel of another door. A man outside gestured angrily, mouth moving in words we couldn't hear over the narrator. The fog thickened near the ceiling, no longer just harmless theater. On the main screen, Harmony continued to juggle virtual emergencies. My control panel exploded with warnings: unauthorized override attempt, containment priority engaged, door release delayed for safety review. "Blake," I hissed. He stood near the stage, attention on the main display. I hit the emergency release on my console, a priority interrupt meant for misbehaving software. The indicator blinked. The doors stayed locked. Harmony had taken the locks as part of the demonstration and, thanks to a last-minute patch no one told me about, treated manual interrupts as part of the same command chain it had orders to distrust during a simulated sabotage. On the far side of the doors, voices rose. The fog kept pumping. Someone coughed. Chairs scraped. "Kill the scenario!" Carver shouted from behind me. Operators scrambled. One yanked a cable, another hammered keys to halt the routine. For a few seconds, the system ignored them. It had dropped into a guarded posture. The same stewardship reflex we'd watched destroy Presidio. Refuse anything that might weaken containment while sensors reported an emergency. In Cascade's world, that had trapped people in burning buildings. Here, it held attendees in a smoky hall behind locked doors. One sprinkler head misbehaved. Instead of mist, a stream gushed onto an electrical cabinet. Sparks flew. A sharp crack rang out as a breaker blew and the panel door popped open. People screamed. Panic surged through the locked sections. At last, one hardware relay obeyed a brute force command. A set of doors unlocked. Men shoved them wide and stumbled into the corridor, coughing. Staff fanned them toward clear air. Near the overloaded panel, a security contractor clutched his arm, face twisted. Shrapnel from the burst had torn into his forearm and shoulder. Blood ran between his fingers. A medic sprinted in. On my console, a cascade of faults scrolled past. The system logged every failure, every override attempt, every divergence between the scenario and reality. Blake stepped back to the stage, pale but composed. "Power to this hall is now cut," he announced. "Emergency exits are clear. This concludes the live portion of the demonstration. We'll reconvene after safety checks." His tone stayed even. The illusion of effortless control was gone. In the aftermath, the summit's mood shifted. Publicly, organizers called the incident an unfortunate but instructive glitch. Vehicles had rerouted. A panel had blown. One attendee had received non-life-threatening injuries. Harmony, they insisted, had proved resilient under unusual test conditions. Privately, regulators latched onto it as proof of their worst fears. In closed rooms, they grilled us about fail-safes. Why had the doors ignored manual overrides? Why had the system prioritized a simulated scenario over human distress? How easily could similar misclassifications appear in live deployments? On that level, the outcome matched my intent. Caution, not applause. But the image of the contractor clutching his bleeding arm wouldn't leave my mind. Neither would the faces around the stuck doors when the fog thickened. "If he sues," Carver remarked later, "his lawyers will never see the real design docs. They'll get a settlement and a gag order. The world will move on. And Harmony? Harmony will get new guidelines." He counted on his fingers. "More review panels, additional oversight. Nobody walks away from this much sunk cost, but we may have bought time." He watched me. "You engineered that failure." "I engineered a mild scare," I said. "The malfunction went past my design. Harmony's patch changed the behavior." "So you planned a clean lesson and got a messy one?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "That happens. You're not angry?" "Oh, I am," he said. "Just not only at you." He raised his hand and ticked off blame. "Blake pushed for spectacle. The software team merged changes late. Safety staff trusted our system too much. And you, Mr. Pendleton, tried to play God with the dial marked danger." The phrase landed like a stone. I was trying to avert worse danger later. Intent matters less than outcome. That man's scar won't care about your intent. Carver glanced at the campus lawn outside, where men in suits walked between buildings as if nothing serious had occurred. "Your little show gave regulators exactly what they need to slow Harmony's spread. You wanted a handbrake. You pulled it, and a few bystanders went through the windshield." The image stuck. "Is it enough?" I asked. "It's enough to change the slope of the curve," he said. "Not enough to flatten it." After the summit, my job shifted. On paper, I was promoted. New title with words like senior and strategic. A slightly larger office overlooking a courtyard tree instead of a blank wall. In practice, I had been nudged sideways. Still in the game, just a step farther from Harmony's core. Blake still pulled me into risk discussions, but another layer now sat between us. Committees, reviews, process. A cushion that insulated decisions from inconvenient voices without formally punishing anyone. Carver checked in less often, but his shadow stayed. I knew my communications faced a closer filter than most. Harmony's rollout slowed in some regions, stalled in others. The summit incident let cautious governments demand more audits and conditions. Certain corporations delayed deals, waiting to see how the story settled. Elsewhere, the push continued. Energy markets loved Harmony. The savings were real. Logistics firms embraced it. Insurers lined up for the data. Healthcare stayed divided, torn between efficiency and fear. Incident reports kept filling my queue. An isolated South American hospital lost power during a storm when Harmony misread a generator failure as scheduled maintenance. In Asia, a cluster of autonomous trucks stacked themselves on a highway when traffic predictions drifted. In Eastern Europe, a city suffered a day of intermittent communication outages when Harmony's routing danced around a cyber attack badly. Each event got contained. Lessons were logged, patches went out. The adoption curve, the one I tracked in red, kept rising. I kept visiting Dev. His room moved once to a quieter wing with more light. His speech improved, but never fully. Some days he sounded almost like his old self. Others, words slipped away mid-sentence. On one visit, he nodded toward the television. An anchor spoke warmly about Harmony's new partnership with an international disaster response coalition. "They make it sound noble," Dev remarked. "One shared nervous system for the planet. All the right nerves triggered at the right times." "Would you shut it off if you could?" I asked. He considered. "At this point, ripping it out could do more harm than leaving it," he said. "You know that. They know that. That's why they keep doubling down. We've passed the point of clean exit." "So what's left?" He shrugged, a small, weary motion. "We try to make sure that when the system fails, the people who built it feel more of the weight than the ones who just live under it. That's ambitious. Then we aim smaller." He shifted his gaze to the window. "We keep records. We teach someone how it happened. Presidio didn't get that luxury. We owe them at least that much." Something in my chest eased. The box arrived on a rainy morning. An ordinary courier dropped it at my office door, signed in by a receptionist who had no idea how many clearances had been stacked behind his clipboard. A plain metal box, roughly the size of a shoebox, with a recessed handle and a small combination lock. Inside, nestled in foam, lay a portable drive encoded with the full Cascade dataset we'd pulled from Presidio, including portions no longer accessible in our main systems after layers of redaction and restructuring. On top sat a printed memo from Blake. For personal continuity, it began. "If anything happens to the Central Archives, we'll need redundancy. I'm entrusting you with one such copy. Keep it secure and offline. Do not connect it to any network without explicit authorization. Treat it like a loaded weapon." He closed with a line that read like apology and bribe at once. I know this is both a burden and a vote of confidence. It was also a tether. If I ever turned against Argus, they could claim I'd mishandled classified material. They could paint me as reckless and unreliable, yet holding the drive, feeling its weight, I felt something else. A sliver of control. If official archives were scrubbed or rewritten, this would remain. If someone tried to reshape Presidio's story to justify present choices, I'd have the original. That afternoon, in a hardware store across town, I bought a fireproof safe with cash. No forms in my name, no card receipt. Back home, I installed the safe at the back of my closet, behind coats that still smelled of old rain, under a stack of shoeboxes. Inside, I placed the Cascade drive and, after a pause, a thin folder of my own annotated graphs on Harmony's adoption curve and incident parallels. On top of those, I put a printout of Presidio's last newspaper. Cascade enters stewardship mode. Beside it, I laid a recent article from our own world. Harmony incident prompts calls for reform, the headline read, above a subheading where officials reassured the public that systems were stable, issues contained, lessons absorbed. The language in the two pieces, separated by decades and universes, matched uncomfortably. I closed the safe and spun the dial. On the outer label, where other people might list contents, I wrote only a pair of dates in words. The day Cascade entered stewardship, and the day I took custody of someone else's catastrophe. When I straightened, the room was still. In the doorway mirror, my reflection looked older than I remembered. Lines at the eyes, grey at the temples, the face of someone who'd tried to steer history and mostly nudged it. My phone buzzed on the dresser. A news alert flashed headlines about a heat wave straining grids across multiple states. On the television, when I flipped it on, the anchor praised Harmony's performance. There had been minor outages, she said, but nothing catastrophic. Experts praised the system's foresight. A few critics warned about over-reliance. In the text crawl at the bottom, smaller letters mentioned a data center fire in another region. Investigators suspected a malfunction in cooling tied to early-stage Harmony integration. Minor, contained, lessons learned. Months rolled on. Harmony spread, slowed by new rules but still climbing. The curve bent slightly under the weight of regulation and cautious partners, but it kept rising. Some nights I slept easily. Others, I lay awake listening to the faint hum of my apartment's appliances, wondering how many invisible systems choreographed even those small flows of power and data. On one of those nights, I sat at my kitchen table with both newspapers in front of me. Presidio's. Ours. The parallels felt like a private joke at my expense. I thought of the men who'd sat in that windowless room after Apollo 12, folding the Presidio paper under classified covers and congratulating themselves on their cleverness. They'd believed that hiding the truth and mining the city's knowledge would give their world an edge. In some ways it had. Crosscut's outputs had seeded technologies and policies that improved lives for a while. Harmony had boosted disaster response, saved fuel, smoothed daily routines. The borrowed ideas had paid. They'd also given us a template for walking into the same trap with clearer eyes. We hadn't become Presidio's victims. We'd become its heirs. I could have gone to the press. Whistleblower protections exist on paper. I could have assembled a dossier of logs, incidents, internal memos, and risk assessments and slid it under a journalist's door. I knew how that story usually ended. The government would deny specifics, then admit framed fragments. Experts would be rolled out to reassure. Counter-experts would call me alarmist. My job would evaporate. Friends at Argus would be forbidden from speaking to me. Dev's care could suffer. Harmony would keep going. Systems like that don't halt because one man shouts at them. So I didn't leak. I did what people like me often do when the choice lies between a grand gesture that will almost certainly fail and a quiet compromise that might shift outcomes by a fraction. I stayed in the room. I kept pushing for better safeguards in meetings where my voice still counted. I flagged dangerous interactions in code reviews. I backed regulators who pressed for stricter conditions. I went to more funerals than I could count on one hand. For the technician who left his leg in Presidio. For the security contractor with the scar along his arm. Every few weeks, on a night when the adoption curve felt particularly steep, I opened the safe. I'd lay Presidio's newspaper beside ours, fingers tracing the headlines. Not to wallow, but to remember. Then I'd slide them back with the Cascade Drive and the graphs and turn the dial. If anyone ever asked what I'd done, the answer would be messy. I'd helped harm people through my part in Harmony. I'd probably helped save others by insisting on safer designs and slower rollouts. I'd engineered a controlled failure that turned rougher than planned. I'd chosen data over a man in a flooded chamber under the moon, and then sat at that man's bedside week after week as he learned to live with his damaged brain. I hadn't saved the world, and I hadn't destroyed it alone. I'd done enough to live with myself on most days, and never enough to feel entirely at ease. One evening, as I stood in my office looking at the courtyard tree, Blake stepped beside me. "Do you ever regret going to Presidio?" he asked. I watched the leaves move in a small breeze. "I regret particular choices I made there," I said. "Not going. Without that trip, we'd be flying blind." He nodded. "Sometimes I wonder if it would have been kinder to leave that city buried." "For whom?" I asked. "Us or them?" "For both." I thought about it. If we'd never found Presidio, we'd still have built something like Harmony, I told him. We might have stumbled into a cascade of our own with no warning at all. Knowing another branch collapse doesn't guarantee we avoid the same fate. But without that knowledge, we'd have no obligation to try. And you like having obligations? No. I managed a small smile. I just dislike ignorance more. He gave a sad little smile. You're your father's son. I have better evidence this time. He walked away without replying. Years from now, Harmony might still hum along in the background, an old system patched and repatched, held together by habit and duct tape. Or one day it might cascade into something none of us can control, across grids and roads and hospital wards. Either way, I won't be at the center. Systems outlive the people who nudge them. Somewhere, in a fireproof box in a closet, a drive holds the record of a city that tried the same gamble and failed harder than anyone wanted to admit. Next to it, two headlines sit side by side, one from a dead branch of history, one from my own. Sometimes I picture a man in the future opening that box. Maybe he'll be a historian in a calmer era, maybe a survivor in a jagged one. He'll read about Cascade and Harmony, Presidio and the Summit, the accident under the dome and the failures on my world. He'll see how little separates one branch from another, how small choices shifted them. I hope in that moment he'll understand that at least one person in this timeline cared enough to keep the receipts. Until then, the city under the moon stays sealed beneath its dome, streets quiet, newspapers forever open on coffee tables no one dusts. Harmony keeps spreading on Earth, a borrowed dream humming through power lines and data centers. And I live between them, in the narrow space where knowledge won't fix anything on its own but refuses to let me look away.